On the night of March 17, 2024, three teenage girls left a movie theater in Cape Coral, Florida, expecting to end their evening the way so many teenagers do, with a quick stop at McDonald's before heading home. They never made it. Just a few blocks from the theater, an SUV appeared behind them. At first, it didn't seem unusual. Then it drove past. Moments later, it came back. Its headlights suddenly flooded the dark street, forcing the girls to shield their eyes. Within seconds, several people jumped from the vehicle. Someone demanded their belongings. Then a single gunshot shattered the silence. By the time police arrived, 15-year-old Kayla Rincon-Miller lay critically wounded in the roadway while her two best friends desperately tried to save her life. The shooters had already disappeared into the night. At first, investigators had very little to work with. There was no murder weapon. Conflicting witness accounts made it difficult to determine exactly what had happened. Even one of the suspects would later claim there were more people involved than anyone realized. But over the months that followed, detectives uncovered a trail of surveillance footage, digital evidence, GPS records, witness testimony, and courtroom admissions that slowly reconstructed what happened during those final moments. And as each new piece of evidence emerged, one question remained at the center of the investigation. Who was truly responsible for Kayla Rincon-Miller's death? Some criminal investigations begin with a known suspect. Others begin with a clear motive. This one began with confusion. Three teenagers had simply gone to see a movie during spring break. Within minutes of leaving the theater, one of them had been shot. For investigators, nothing about those first hours suggested an easy case. The suspects had vanished. The firearm was missing. Witnesses had only seconds to process what they had seen. And detectives were left trying to answer a series of questions that would shape the investigation for the next 2 years. Why had these girls been targeted? Who was inside the SUV? Who fired the fatal shot? And could those answers be proven beyond a reasonable doubt? But before investigators pieced together that timeline, they first had to understand who Kayla Rincon-Miller was. By every account shared publicly by family and friends, Kayla Rincon-Miller was exactly where any 15-year-old hoped to be during spring break. She wasn't attending a party. She wasn't involved in an argument. She wasn't looking for trouble. Instead, she had spent the evening doing something remarkably ordinary. She and her friends, Emma Wright and Luann DJ, went to Coralwood 10 Theater in Cape Coral to watch a movie together. It was the kind of evening thousands of teenagers experience every weekend. According to investigators, they simply happened to be walking along the wrong street at the wrong moment. After the movie ended, the three girls began walking toward a nearby McDonald's located on Del Prado Boulevard. The distance wasn't far. It was a route that seemed uneventful. Traffic moved through nearby intersections. Businesses had already begun closing for the night. Streetlights illuminated parts of the roadway, while other stretches remained noticeably darker. For the girls, the walk likely felt routine. As Kayla and her friends continued walking, they became aware of a vehicle nearby. At first, there was little reason to think much of it. Cars passed through the area regularly. But according to testimony later presented in court, this vehicle didn't simply continue down the road. Instead, it returned. The vehicle, a silver Nissan Pathfinder rented by Thomas Stein's mother, appeared to make a U-turn before approaching the girls again. The SUV's headlights suddenly shined directly toward them. Instead of briefly illuminating the road, the bright beams temporarily blinded the teenagers. With the girls struggling to see clearly, multiple individuals exited the SUV. The ordinary walk from the movie theater ended instantly. Several individuals approached the girls and demanded their belongings. It wasn't a prolonged encounter. Investigators later argued that the group had been searching for robbery victims throughout the evening. The defense would challenge portions of that narrative, particularly who was present and what each individual knew before the confrontation began. A single gunshot echoed across the street. Kayla collapsed. Her friends later described the frantic realization that she had been shot. The people who had confronted them were already running back toward the SUV. Within moments, the vehicle disappeared into the night. Two teenagers remained beside their wounded friend, desperately trying to keep her alive while emergency responders raced toward the scene. Within minutes of the gunshot, Cape Coral police officers and emergency medical personnel began arriving along Southeast 16th Place. The scene they encountered was chaotic but remarkably focused around one priority: saving Kayla's life. Officers secured the area while paramedics rushed to treat the 15-year-old, who had suffered a gunshot wound during what investigators believed was an attempted robbery. Kayla was transported to Gulf Coast Medical Center. Despite emergency treatment, she later died from her injuries. For her family, the phone call that followed would forever divide life into before and after. Among the most important recordings was surveillance footage from a nearby St. Vincent, Delaware Paul thrift store. The camera had no idea it was recording a future murder investigation. It simply captured vehicles passing through its field of view. But investigators noticed something unusual. A silver Nissan Pathfinder appeared in the area before the shooting. Then, instead of continuing on its route, it executed a U-turn. According to prosecutors, that maneuver showed the occupants deliberately returning toward the three girls. At that stage of the investigation, detectives still didn't know who was inside the SUV. But they now had something even more valuable, a vehicle that could be tracked. Detectives soon learned that the Pathfinder had been rented. The rental agreement led investigators to Thomas Stein's mother. That discovery did not establish guilt, but it provided detectives with their first identifiable connection to the SUV seen on surveillance video. Now they had names to investigate. And that changed everything. Instead of searching for an unknown vehicle, detectives could begin examining the people who had access to it. As investigators gathered additional records, the movements of the Pathfinder became increasingly clear. GPS information showed the vehicle traveling throughout Cape Coral that evening. License plate reader data confirmed its presence in the area during the same time window as the shooting. The surveillance footage and digital tracking supported each other. Neither piece of evidence stood alone. Together, they created a timeline, one that prosecutors would later present to jurors as a nearly continuous record of the vehicle's movements before and after the attack. Then another discovery complicated the investigation. One phone was missing, not misplaced, destroyed. During later court testimony, Christopher Horn Jr. acknowledged throwing his cell phone into the Caloosahatchee River after the shooting. He testified that he knew investigators would eventually examine it. The admission immediately raised another question. Why destroy the phone? Prosecutors argued that it demonstrated consciousness of guilt. The defense, however, urged jurors to carefully evaluate Horn's credibility, reminding them that he had admitted lying to investigators before reaching a plea agreement. That distinction mattered, because Horn would soon become the prosecution's most significant witness. His testimony had the potential to answer one of the biggest unanswered questions in the case. But it also required jurors to decide whether they believed him. Before that testimony could unfold, investigators still had another mystery to solve. If the phone had been destroyed, what happened to the gun? Despite extensive investigative efforts, the firearm allegedly used during the attempted robbery was never found. According to Christopher Horn Jr.'s later testimony, the gun also ended up in the Caloosahatchee River. Without the weapon, investigators could not rely on traditional forensic comparisons linking a recovered firearm to the fatal bullet. Instead, prosecutors built their case through overlapping forms of evidence: surveillance footage, GPS tracking, cell phone analysis, witness testimony, statements made by the defendants, and photographs recovered during the digital investigation. Eventually, someone inside the SUV would begin talking, and when that happened, the investigation would take its most dramatic turn. By the time investigators identified the silver Nissan Pathfinder, the investigation had entered a very different phase. The question was no longer whether the shooting had been a robbery gone wrong. Now detectives needed to answer something far more difficult. Who inside that SUV was responsible for Kayla Rincon-Miller's death? That distinction mattered because multiple people were believed to have been involved. Even if only one person had fired the gun, investigators would need to determine what role every passenger had played before, during, and after the attempted robbery. The answers would ultimately shape one of the most closely watched murder prosecutions in Southwest Florida. Detectives began reconstructing the SUV's movements throughout the evening of March 17, 2024. According to evidence later presented in court, the group had spent time driving around Cape Coral looking for opportunities to commit crimes. Prosecutors argued that the original plan involved burglarizing vehicles. Testimony later suggested that the discussion eventually shifted toward robbing people instead. Another name quickly became central to the investigation: Christopher Horn Jr. Like Thomas Stein, Horn had been inside the Pathfinder that night. But unlike Stein, Horn would eventually choose to cooperate with prosecutors. That decision would dramatically change the direction of the case. Months later, Horn accepted a plea agreement. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he agreed to testify truthfully about what had happened on the night Kayla was killed. His testimony would become one of the prosecution's most important pieces of evidence. It would also become one of the most heavily challenged. Before that testimony ever reached a courtroom, investigators had to determine whether Horn's account matched the physical evidence. According to Horn, the group had initially planned to rob people at another location. When that opportunity didn't materialize, they continued driving. Eventually they noticed three teenage girls walking together. Investigators alleged that Thomas Stein drove past them, then circled back. The SUV's headlights illuminated the girls. Moments later, several occupants got out. The attempted robbery began. And within seconds, Kayla had been shot. Detectives carefully compared Horn's timeline against witness interviews, surveillance footage, and other evidence collected during the investigation. Horn admitted something else that immediately caught investigators' attention. He acknowledged that he had lied during earlier interviews with law enforcement. That admission created an obvious challenge. Why should investigators believe him now? According to prosecutors, Horn eventually decided to tell the truth after realizing the weight of the evidence against him. While detectives continued building their case, Thomas Stein maintained a very different version of events. From the beginning, he denied being the shooter.
Did you shoot and kill Kayla Rincon-Miller?
No, sir.
Do you know who did?
Yes, sir.
At the same time, other officers started searching for anyone who might have seen the SUV before or after the shooting. Later, when he testified in his own defense, Stein acknowledged that he had been present that night. He did not deny being inside the Pathfinder. He did not deny that he had fled after the gunshot. But he rejected the prosecution's claim that he fired the weapon. During both the trial and sentencing proceedings, he maintained that he believed the plan involved stealing from vehicles, not robbing pedestrians at gunpoint. According to Stein, events escalated beyond anything he expected. He testified that when the confrontation began, he tried to separate people involved. Then, before he understood what was happening, the gun discharged. That account stood in direct conflict with Horn's testimony, which placed the weapon in Stein's hands. The two stories could not both be true. Resolving that conflict would become one of the jury's most important responsibilities. Among the first people to testify were Kayla's two closest friends, Emma Wright and Luann DJ. For the jury, these were not simply witnesses. They had lived through the attack. Both young women described spending what they expected would be an ordinary spring break evening with Kayla. When the jury returned, the courtroom fell silent. One by one, the verdicts were read. Thomas Stein was found guilty of first-degree felony murder. He was also found guilty on 3 counts of attempted robbery with a firearm. The verdict answered one of the biggest legal questions in the case. Shortly after the verdict, Stein's attorneys filed a motion requesting a new trial. The defense argued that inconsistencies existed between earlier deposition testimony and statements made during trial by one of Kayla's surviving friends regarding the identity of the shooter. After reviewing the arguments, Judge Nicholas Thompson denied the request. The convictions remained in place. The case now moved to its final stage. By July 10, 2026, the Lee County courtroom was once again filled with family members, investigators, attorneys, reporters, and community members. Before the judge announced the sentence, those most affected by the crime were given an opportunity to speak. Emma Wright stepped forward. The attack had not only taken her best friend, it had changed her own life in ways that continued long after the crime scene had been cleared. Luann DJ also addressed the court. Her words reflected the lasting emotional impact of losing someone she cared deeply about. "I feel like I'm trapped in a coma that I can't wake up from," she said.
There are no words that can truly describe the void I wake up with every single day. It feels like I'm trapped in a coma that I can't wake up from.
Like I'm suffocating but somehow still expected to keep on living.
Like I'm suffocating, but somehow still expected to keep on living.
Then she spoke about the person at the center of the case. "Losing Kayla changed every part of my life." The courtroom listened quietly. No legal argument could measure the weight carried in those few sentences. Thomas Stein addressed the court. He did not ask the judge to declare him innocent. Instead, he expressed regret for the choices he had made. Stein acknowledged that getting behind the wheel that night had been a total act of selfishness.
That day I made a terrible decision. The decision to get behind the wheel was a total act of selfishness.
He told the court that regardless of his intentions, nothing could change the fact that Kayla had lost her life and that innocent people had been traumatized. As his statement came to an end, Stein made one final request. Looking toward his family seated behind him, the 18-year-old asked Judge Thompson if he could hug them before being taken into custody.
And I'm remorseful for my actions, and I'm sorry. And I just ask you this one thing. If before I walk out the courtroom, if I could give my family a hug, if you'd allow that.
The request transformed the atmosphere inside the courtroom. For a brief moment, attention shifted away from legal arguments and focused on a deeply human scene. Judge Thompson responded immediately. "I can't grant that request in here," he said. "You can say goodbye, but you can't have any physical contact."
No, I can't grant that request in here.
Okay, that's fine.
You can say goodbye, but you can't have any physical contact.
Okay.
The judge explained that the decision reflected standard courtroom security procedures rather than a personal judgment. Stein nodded. He would be allowed to speak to his family, but he would not embrace them before beginning his prison sentence. The hearing was now approaching its final and most consequential moment. Judge Thompson prepared to announce the punishment that would bring one chapter of this case to a close. Judge Thompson sentenced Thomas Stein to life in prison for first-degree felony murder. As deputies prepared to escort Stein from the courtroom, he was allowed to say goodbye to his family. Today, Thomas Stein remains incarcerated under the sentence imposed by the Lee County Court. Christopher Horn Jr. is serving the 25-year sentence he received under his plea agreement after testifying for the prosecution. Thank you for watching. If this case raised questions for you about Florida's felony murder law, the investigation, or the evidence presented during trial, share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. Thoughtful discussion helps keep attention on the facts and on the people whose lives were changed by this tragedy.
I want you to tell me about Kayla.
Evidence-based true crime documentaries that follow the investigation
Kayla was a sweet girl.
from beginning to end.
Very
Consider
special,
subscribing
very
for future
outgoing,
cases. As
a little
always,
firecracker,
thank you for watching, and I'll see you in
but
the
she
next
had a big
documentary.
heart.